Hello and welcome to this video on free, mixed and command economies. In this video we're going to look at what is meant by free, mixed and command economies, and then look at the advantages and disadvantages of each way of setting up an economy. We're also going to look a little bit at the end briefly about some of the economic philosophers who underpinned these different models. So a quick reminder, we've looked at this before. What is an economy? An economy is a social system through which decisions about what, how and for whom to produce are made. So resources are turned by firms into products, goods and services that are wanted to consume by households. But who should be doing the allocation? How should this allocation be made? Here are 5 examples that we can use to discuss. We've got the top left, a sports car, we've got a diamond ring, we've got housing, we've got healthcare, and we've got education. Now, these are all resources, goods and services made from resources that we have to allocate to people as an economy and make a decision about who should get them. Now, how should we go about allocating these things? Should we allocate them by who can afford it? Just say if you can pay the price of that particular thing, you can have it. Or should we be allocating it in a different way, perhaps by the government? Well, in most economies, things like fast cars are allocated by who can afford it. If you can afford the price of the fast car, then you get it. Likewise with diamond rings. But in some countries, you might make an argument that actually, who is it who really needs fast cars? Actually, it's people like perhaps doctors or the police, and therefore it shouldn't be who can afford it. It should be who needs it the most. In terms of housing, again, in most countries, it's allocated by who can afford it. But is that always the case? If you can't afford a house, can you still access one? Yes, because sometimes it's allocated by the government. In terms of healthcare, again, you can access healthcare by paying for it, but also you can access healthcare by not paying for it. It's provided by the government. In terms of education, the majority of education throughout the world is provided by the government, not actually paid for directly by students or their parents. So we've got a spectrum here of some things that are allocated just by people who can pay the price, some things that are allocated in a different way by those who need it or those who require it. And those different approaches are assigned to 3 different types of economic system. The first one is called a free market economy, and that is where resources, goods and services are allocated by who can pay the price, by demand and supply, by going into the market and paying the price for those items. We have a mixed economy, and that's an economic system where some resources are allocated by the market and some resources by the government. And we've got a final one, which is a command economy, and that is where all resources are allocated by the government. You can't spend money to buy something. The resources, the decisions are made by a central government. These are all important definitions, and let's make sure we've got them down in our notes. So the 2 different extremes, at one end a market capitalist, or sometimes known as a free market economy, and at the other end a command economy, sometimes known as a socialist economy. And there are very few examples of a pure free market economy, and there are very few examples of a pure command economy. Most economies lie along a spectrum, somewhere in between. So down the left-hand side, we've got all resources allocated by the free market. In the middle, some resources allocated by free market, some by government. The furthest right, all resources allocated by the government. And most countries lie on a spectrum somewhere between the 2. So some countries have more allocation done by the government, and some countries have more allocation done by the free market. What are the advantages of free market economies? Well, they're considered to be more efficient. Individual members decide which resources they want. If I want something, I pay the price. It's not a government trying to tell me whether I need something or not. You have more choice potentially in a free market. You can choose what you want, you can choose what you do by whether you want to buy or sell. As a result of competition in a marketplace, lots of different people selling products, there's an incentive to create good ideas, to be innovative. Over the course of history, it's been shown that, generally speaking, free market economies have achieved faster rates of economic growth, i.e. they've got wealthier quicker than other economies. Disadvantages? Well, often you get very rich people and very poor people, a wide gap between the rich and poor in free market economies. Some people consider whether actually it's not particularly fair. Should all education be allocated by who can pay for it, or should it actually go to those who maybe deserve it? Likewise with healthcare, so it might not be that fair. Some goods and services might not be provided that actually benefit society. Who would want to pay for, let's say, a lighthouse where actually, I can still use it if I don't pay for it? So there might be an under provision of certain goods and services. If there's no government involved here, it's a pure free market, there's no government involvement, then there might not be any particular laws or a strong legal framework, and that can lead to things happening that we wouldn't necessarily want. Now let's look at a command economy where the government makes the allocation of all the resources, tells you what to do, allocates who will get bread, who will get cars, who will get education, and so on. So these economies tend to be less prone to crashes and swings, and it can also, the allocation be part of a strategic plan. They can make sure the right amount of stuff is happening in the economy. They can ensure that everyone has a job, and they can ensure that items are shared on an equal basis. So whilst they sound good in theory, there's been many examples where actually there's significant disadvantages of a command economy. Over time, they've been shown that, generally speaking, because of a lack of competition, a lack of choice, and a lack of freedom, they live to lower standards of living. It can often live to a misallocation of resources. Does the government know what you want? How would they know what your desired range of goods and services are? Do they know which type of car you want, whether you need a car or not? It's very difficult. It's also difficult to coordinate. Telling one company needs to make this and then give it to the other company who then can make that can become very difficult to coordinate these different flows of resources around the economy. There is the risk of corruption. If you want to get your hands on a car, there might be an incentive, whereas normally in a free market economy you just pay the price of the car. Here you might try and bribe the government official who allocates cars and try and convince them to give you one. Overall, there's often less choice because there's less different options than in a marketplace. Now, these different economic systems have been underpinned or argued by certain economists. The first economist here is Adam Smith, and he certainly promoted a kind of free market approach. He said that everyone can be better off in a free market if they pursue their own self-interest, and what's good for yourself can be good for other people, and the incentive of a profit can help along those ways. Friedrich Hayek was another one who promoted more of a free market. Greater state control in the economy leads to a loss of freedom for the individual. He cited the poor in the UK and the USA were better off than in Germany and the Soviet Union because they had personal freedom. If it was also allocated by government, you've got a small minority of people in the government who are making decisions that affect the whole of society. Karl Marx was an economist who actually argued more for the command economy. He looked at the gulf of the economic fortunes between workers and the owners of the factors of production in free market economies, and they came up with the idea that a command economy where the state owned most of the resources and allocated them amongst the workers would lead to a more desirable outcome for society as a whole. So in this video we've looked at the three different types of economic system and some of the advantages and disadvantages of each. Thank you for listening. That's it.